The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus and his disciples left from there and began a journey through Galilee, but he did not wish anyone to know about it. He was teaching his disciples and telling them, "The Son of Man is to be handed over to men, and they will kill him. And 3 days after his death, the Son of Man will rise." But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to question him. They came to Capernaum, and once inside the house, he began to ask them, "What were you arguing about along the way?" But they remained silent. They had been discussing among themselves on the way who was the greatest. Then he sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "If anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all and the servant of all." Taking a child, he placed it in their midst, and putting his arms around it, he said to them, "Whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me." The Gospel of the Lord. Well, this month, September, towards the end of the month, and I'm going to do it today, every priest in the Diocese of Lincoln is going to be asking every churchgoer for money, which, well, what else is new, right? And I can sympathize. Once you're ordained a priest, somehow your name, address, and telephone number gets given to every single charitable organization on earth, and you get like 10 pieces of mail asking for money every week. But this, what I'm asking for is a special collection that is close to my heart, and I hope that it's close to yours as well, and that is the Bishop's Appeal for Vocations. Our local seminary, St. Gregory the Great Seminary, south of Seward, Nebraska, has grown by leaps and bounds in many ways over the last 20 years. Since 1998, it has served to train young men for the priesthood, and it is essential to the life of our diocese, but it is expensive. If we didn't have priests, we wouldn't be here. I want to talk about a few ways that we can encourage and foster vocations in the priesthood today. And I can say personally, without a doubt, that if St. Gregory the Great Seminary were not built so close to where I grew up, only about 5 miles north of where I grew up on the farm, I wouldn't be a priest. And one of the reasons for that is before I went to the seminary, I worked at the seminary for 2 years of high school and 2 years of college. And I did things like mowing lawns and cataloging library books and doing maintenance and waxing floors and things like that. And for 3.5 of those 4 years, I refused to even consider the possibility of becoming a priest. I was studying architecture, and I wanted to land a nice job at an engineering firm. I had a nice girlfriend. We were pretty serious. And, you know, I did have people coming up to me asking, just knowing where I worked, are you going to become a priest someday? And, of course, I assured them there wasn't a chance in heck that would ever happen. And things changed over time, obviously, but one moment that I can really point to that really got me thinking about that I would be accepted to go to the seminary, that I was worthy of it, is that one day when I was working outside, and there's sort of a long sidewalk that goes to the main entrance of the doors of the seminary, and at the end of that long sidewalk is sort of a circle drive for vehicles to turn around in. In the middle of that circle drive, there is a flower bed, and I was planting flowers in that flower bed. And I saw Father Fulda, who is now Bishop Fulda of Fargo, North Dakota. He was the rector of the seminary, which is kind of like the president of the university. And he walked all the way out of down that long sidewalk from the seminary's entrance, and he got there and we made small talk for a minute or so. And this give you kind of context, this is very unusual for him to do something like this. And then he sort of just stopped talking, and he simply said, "You should go to the seminary. You would do well there." And then he turned around without saying anything else and walked all the way back into the seminary. And it sort of blew my mind. It was a simple word of encouragement. And so I use that story to tell you to not be afraid to say something to a young man along those lines, because you might see something in them that they don't see in themselves. So that's the first way that we can encourage and foster vocations, by encouraging young men to go to the seminary. Another way is quite obvious that we can encourage and foster vocations is to pray. And the first thing that we need to pray for is an increase in holiness among married couples and families, first and foremost. Everybody comes into the world, whether good or bad, through some form of family. We begin to learn our vocation in the context of our family life. And today, family life is far from being conducive to fostering vocations to the priesthood. Families are affected by divorce, sports, grade school and high school sports has replaced going to church. Pop culture tells us that it's more convenient to shrug off the commitment that marriage requires, or pop culture changes the definition of marriage altogether. So families need our prayers. But so do those who are being called to the priesthood and to the religious life. Our over-sexualized world that we live in makes it very, very difficult to reach young men with a message of chastity, with the message of self-gift. Trust me, it is extremely difficult to hear a call to the seminary or to the priesthood, let alone answer that call. The reason why there is a shortage of priests and sisters in our country is not because God isn't calling them, it's because they can't hear his call to them. And in a lot of cases, they're too distracted to take that call seriously, or they feel themselves unworthy because of sinfulness to take that call seriously. In the past 2 years, and we've thought that we were invincible in the Diocese of Lincoln over many, many decades, but in the past 2 years, we've had a grand total of 2 seminarians enter the seminary. And you might think, well, that's okay. There's 1 or 2 priests at least that are ordained every year. Well, the thing is that around 70% of seminarians that enter the seminary, they leave the seminary before they're ordained priests. I, 18 years ago, entered the seminary with 13 other guys, and 4 of us were ordained priests, 3 of us for the Diocese of Lincoln. And so we need to pray harder than ever, to pray for vocations to holy marriage first, and to family life, and to the priesthood and religious life. We need to pray for that every day. It's not something we should be taking for granted. A third way to support vocations is through the topic of this homily, really, is the Bishop's Appeal for Vocations that we annually do every September. And the goal of the appeal is to raise $800,000 across the diocese to defray the approximately $1.25 million it takes to educate our seminarians every year. That the goal of $800,000 has not changed over the past several years, and really spreading it out over all of the 150 or so parishes across the diocese, that's not asking very much. So for us this year, our parish goal in Cambridge is $2,860, and the parish goal in Arapahoe is $2,000. And it's important. If it were not for things like this appeal, I would have not been able to go to the seminary myself. Growing up with no way to afford a 4-year college education, a $35,000 a year private education was completely out of the question, which is what it costs per seminarian per year. And so this appeal, it makes it possible for seminarians to go to the school only having to take out $5,000 worth of student loans a year. And that's important. And it's so important that I take it quite seriously myself. I'm not saying this to brag. I've already made my donation, and it, as always, is about 10% of our parish goal. That's what I do every year, because it should be important to us. I want there to be a priest to give me last rites as I die. I want my nieces and nephews to have priests baptize and catechize their children and their children's children. I want there to still be a church in a world that is in desperate need of God. So think about what you're able to give this year. Compare that to what you spend on your cell phone or your cable bill or Netflix or Disney Plus or whatever streaming services you use. We're not being asked to give a whole lot, but we shouldn't allow our parish goal, which is the bare minimum, to limit our generosity. This past week, on Tuesday, we celebrated the feast day of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. And it's one of my favorite feast days. When I was a deacon, I've talked about this many times before, but I got the chance to go to the Holy Land, to go on a pilgrimage, a 10-day pilgrimage. And I saw all the places where Jesus himself walked and preached and lived. But my favorite place in all of the Holy Land was the place where he died. I saw it's all located inside of what is called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And it's a big church that's built over the part of the old city of Jerusalem where the last 5 Stations of the Cross took place. And when every morning we would go there early before the tourists would get there at like 4 or 5 a.m. And we would go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and celebrate Mass. We were in Jerusalem, I think, for 5 days. And so for 4 of those days, we had Mass 3 of those days we had Mass in the actual tomb of Jesus. And one of those days we had Mass actually on Calvary where the crucifixion took place. And when you're in the Holy Land, the Mass that you celebrate is the Mass of your location. So for example, if you're offering Mass in Bethlehem, every single day you offer Christmas Day Mass. If you are offering Mass in the tomb of Jesus, every single day you offer Easter Sunday Mass. And if you're offering Mass on Calvary, you offer the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross, which is this last Tuesday's feast day. And when you're in that building, you can get a little bit of a sense of it. It's kind of difficult because there is a church built over the top of all of these sort of archaeological sites. But the cross was planted, that Jesus hung on, the cross was planted in a really steep outcrop of rock. And you sort of, like I said, lose that because a church has been built over the top of it. But they do have places in the floor and on the walls where it's glassed in and you can actually see the rock that the cross was located on. And in some places you can actually reach, they have a hole and you can reach through the floor and actually touch it with your own hand. And the rock in Jerusalem is this, it's not exactly chalky, but it's not a really hard rock. It's kind of this creamy, yellowish, whitish stone. I'm guessing it's limestone. I'm not a geologist. But the rock of Calvary, that you can kind of go down behind it, and there's this glass wall of a big portion of the rock is exposed, and you can see it through the glass. And this rock behind the glass was not that weird yellowish, whitish color. It was actually brown, and it had brown splotches all over it. And I thought that was odd because it didn't look like any of the other rocks in Jerusalem. And after looking at it for a while, I realized that it was brown is because it was covered in blood. I was looking at where Jesus' precious blood was spilled on Good Friday. And that's where, in that moment, I realized that's the exact spot where he gave everything out of love for me. The reason I bring that up is because God isn't calling us to shed our blood or lose our lives for the sake of the faith, at least not yet. And so, what does that leave us with to give back? Well, after seeing Calvary with my own eyes, I know that I can never give enough. When you're there, you feel like you shouldn't be there. like the place is too holy, like people shouldn't be there taking pictures. So moments like that, I realize that all I have left to give is myself and my material possessions. If I were attached to those things, then it would be forgetting everything that God has done for us. It would be forgetting the blood that he shed for me. Every vocation, whether it's to marriage or the priesthood or the religious life, is precious. And every vocation adds one more worker in God's harvest. Every vocation gives birth to new life in the church. And so each one of us needs to take a special part in that. Each one of us contributes something completely unique to God's plan. And so with confidence in him, we place our lives on the altar as Jesus did on the altar of the cross. And we ask for the grace necessary to accept his will, his plan for us. And realizing all of that, we can certainly say that God can never be outdone in generosity. And so we ought to give as much as we can.